some of what's going on here. Okay, I'm ready. I believe. I think I got the most.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for our March 10th, 2022 Raleigh Transit Authority meeting called to order today at 3:42 p.m. The governor's issued executive orders requiring individuals to remain in their homes except for certain activities, closing many businesses to the public and prohibiting gatherings that do not comply with its terms because of the risk to the public would arise from continued in-person meetings pursuant of NCGS 166A-19.24. The city is converting Raleigh Transit Authority meetings to a remote electronic format for the duration of the state of emergency, which will end this month, thank God, and we will be back in person in April. I will call roll for the meeting. Please state present or here if you hear your name. Nathan Spencer.
Present.
Karen Range. Sarah Prado. Jennifer Truman.
Here.
Brian Burnett. Joshua Gill.
Here.
Latanya Williams.
Here.
LaPonda Edmondson.
Here.
And I know there's one other, but for some reason it's not on my roster. Lindy Davis here. Thank you. All right, so it looks like we are here and have a quorum. Are there any, can we get approval of the minutes for March's minutes?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Jen Truman, second.
All right, thank you. It has been Linda Davis. Thank you. All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. I'm going to call your names. Please state aye or nay. Nathan Spencer.
Aye.
Joshua Gill.
Aye.
Linda Davis. Latanya Williams.
Aye.
And I, Tallulah Pale Mokaya. Oh, Jennifer Truman.
Aye.
All right, thank you. It has now been passed, the minutes from February's meeting. Do we have any additions or revisions to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, I did have really rearranging that I think the body might appreciate so that we get as much information in today as possible. I would say that we do have a very full agenda today with quite a bit of information. We do have 2 or actually 3 guest speakers today. And while we do not have any staff action items, we do have some items that may, well, actually we have one that's coming out of committee, and we also have an item that we're presenting as information, but the board may or may not want to take action on that. So we did leave that as information. So what I would propose potentially is that we take item B first. That is the New Bern Avenue art update or artist update by Miss Kelly McChesney. And then we would follow that up with what we have listed as equity fund, but it's really a discussion about the transit-oriented development and affordable housing around bus rapid transit stations and corridors. And we would have that presentation by Mr. Jason Harden and Mark Perlman. And then we'll follow that up with the COVID policy update, and then we'll either go into committee reports or the retreat overview, which I have available today for us as well, depending upon how much time we have left. I know that was a lot of information to shuffle real quick, but if you had to write that down, that would be item B, D, C, then A.
Mm-hmm.
So D, D, C, then A. Again, that would allow us to get our guest in, because I do think they have some great information for us today. Also, I would ask Andrea to confirm. I don't think we had any public comments today, which we normally handle at 4:00. And Andrea, can you either confirm or deny that? Last time I checked, we did not.
That is correct. No public comment.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, I'll just put that out there for consideration, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, before I jump to moving that around, thank you for that information. Are there any people on the authority that might have to jump off who have something they want to say from their committee that might be pressing, that maybe moving this around might kind of jumble at all? Any chair people? Okay, great. Well, sounds good to me that we move those around that way. So it looks like if there are, those are the only revisions, if there's no public comments, then staff information items, then we'll go ahead and jump into item B, which is the New Bern Avenue artist updates.
Yes, thank you. And today we have Ms. Kelly McChesney with.
Madam Chair, it looks like Karen's trying to talk, but I actually couldn't hear her audio.
Oh, sorry about that.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. You're here. Okay, awesome.
I guess I was on mute. I did have one item to discuss, but it can be under the marketing committee.
Okay, and
What we had mentioned, what my having to do with the gas prices and how we can use that as a marketing opportunity for our free bus service right now.
Mhm.
So, thank you.
That's perfect. And you have time, even with us adjusting that, to be able to go ahead and spit that, or do we need to move marketing up a little if that takes a little time since Art is waiting?
Well, since marketing is always last, I would love it if we could do it sooner, but that's just depending on time.
Right.
But I don't have I don't have a hard stop today.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. So let's go ahead and jump into item B, the artist update.
All right, and again, today we have Ms. Kelly McChesney with Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources with us. And welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Yes, we'd like to give an update on the artwork for New Bern Avenue. And I think, Andrew, you may have the slides. We can go to the next one. Just an overview of this presentation agenda. We'll review previous RTA touchpoints, just an overview of the art integration, some previous and upcoming public feedback opportunities. We'll review a little bit of the art review process and then open up for discussion. Next slide. So transit staff did provide an update for us at their February 3rd RTA Marketing Committee meeting. And during that meeting, they provided the committee with information on the artist selection process, some engagement, upcoming engagement opportunities. We worked with the community to come up with a panel discussion called Public Art and Public Memory. This was a panel discussion that was created with Linda Dallas, who's a professor at St. Augustine's College University. And she's done this panel before, so she reworked it specifically with some of the community members to talk about New Bern Avenue. And you can read a little bit about that in the Visit Raleigh article by David Minconi. There's also a video. We did record the whole panel, and the video exists online at our City of Raleigh Wake Transit Public Art page. For the overview, I'm Kelly McChesney. I'm Public Art Director with Raleigh Arts. Should have said that from the beginning. But we're the managing department for the art integration of this project, as well as all public art within the city. Transit is a participating partner and has been working with us throughout the beginning. When we started with the Artists in Residence program with Derek Coulter, again, that was the first Artists in Residence program with the city. So we think it was a really wonderful chance to get an early start on some of the planning for the art on this project. The final report was published and serves as a starting point for current and future artists. And we used her report to write the RFQs and artist calls for the artists. So in November, 11 artists were chosen by public artist selection panels to create work for the New Bern Avenue corridor. And just, it's important to note that this time there are no conceptual art designs for review tonight. They are currently working to gather this information. They've been working with local historians and a lot of city staff just to gather and gather images, gather research and stories, and we'll be presenting their concept design soon. Next slide. And I'm not sure if everyone's seen this before, but these are the 11 artists that were selected. Leslie Bartleball, Johnny Lee Chapman, Jane Cheek, Max Dowdle, Sean Etheridge, Mayanthi Jayawardena, Georges Le Chevalier, Alberto Ortega, Kiara Sanders, Felix Obelix, and David Wilson. Next slide. I did want to point out that if you would like to learn more about those artists, on the Wake BRT Art Integration webpage, there's a collective biography, and they're all really interesting. So I hope you'll go and learn more about them. So based off the artist in residence final report and process style of the glass artists, each artist was assigned to 2 station platforms. So they'll all basically take a station, 2 different platforms to create their designs. They're working from histories that the local historians put together for each station area. The glass art planned for all platforms except for Go Raleigh Station, and that was because the business owners were a little bit concerned with the transparency, so we are not doing glass art at that one location. The concrete artwork integration is planned for all stations, and that material type size is really up to the concrete artist, and he'll be prepared to show more of his concepts soon. Next slide. Some of the previous engagement opportunities we've had, we did a corridor walk, which was led by Octavia Rainey and Carmen Coffin. The artists were all with us. We got in a big bus and went all along the corridor and some of the neighborhoods around the area as well. So that was a really wonderful day for everyone. Also in November, the Wake BRT Stakeholder Committee meeting, transit staff presented the info on the artists and the selection process for us. We also presented to our Public Art and Design Board. The Public Art and Design Board oversees the public art projects with the city of Raleigh. And we presented the selection of the railing and concrete artists to them at that time. We did a special meet and greet, special meet and greet round with concrete integration artist Johnny Lee Chapman. And it's because he's doing so much along the corridor. We really wanted to give members of the community an opportunity to meet with him. And then, of course, we had our Public Art and Public Memory panel. And again, the Public Art and Design Board provided some feedback early on to Johnny Lee Chapman. Next slide. Thanks, Andrea. So upcoming, we're going to have the draft conceptual art designs due from the artists this April, and we will be sharing them for public input. The glass art railing concrete designs will be available by video, will be shared primarily via public input. So members of the community and stakeholders can review those videos. They'll be able to hear the artists explain some of their process and why they are going in this direction with their concept design, and they'll be able to provide feedback directly through that platform, and of course, also by emailing staff. At that time, it's important to note that there's a minimum of 40 separate conceptual designs for review. This is really a new process for us. It would take a long time to get through that if we were to just have all the artists come present at one meeting. So community members can watch the videos as they have time instead of coming to one meeting. That would probably take a couple hours or more. And the feedback gathered will help the artists and will inform their final designs. So instructions on how to provide feedback as well as periodic updates will be shared with this or through the Wake BRT Art Integration project page. Next slide. The review process. So the artists do check in with our Public Art and Design Board for feedback. As we are the managing department, we follow City of Raleigh public art policy for all public art projects. And our board is comprised of those with artistic backgrounds and subject matter experts. So they don't approve or deny designs necessarily, but they do help artists understand certain things that they need to consider as far as their designs go. Also, the city council does not approve or deny designs. We really do work with the artists in the community to move forward in these conceptual designs. And all boards and commissions will have the opportunity to weigh in, as well as the public, and basically through the same means as well as your board meetings. And because the New Bern corridor is in the NCDOT right away, we did want to mention that the NCDOT does have review power over conceptual designs for content and compliance with their standards. So that will be the final kind of review process that we go through with the art. And some changes may have to be made depending on what their requirements are. Next slide. Oh, and I think that's it for me. So are there any questions about the art process at this point?
Thank you, Kelly, for your presentation. That was very thorough and helpful. Are there any questions from the authority before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. Well, it seems as no. Just
Madam Chair.
yes,
Madam Chair,
Karen.
Karen Ringe. I just wanted to thank Kelly. We've met before in other contexts, and I am the chair of the marketing committee. And we really appreciate all the work that Raleigh Arts has done to take into account the community and the history and unique culture of the New Bern Avenue corridor in this process. We certainly heard a lot of public comment throughout the past couple of years, really, that was important. And so thank you for all you've done, and thank you for really trying to engage the community and be inclusive. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Karen.
I do have a quick question now that you said that. Thank you, thank you, Karen. Are there any of the artists, are any of them from Raleigh?
Yes, sorry, I meant to mention that they are all local. The artist calls one out specifically to find local artists. So they are in Triangle area, but many of them are based here right in Raleigh, yes.
Okay, and are any of them from Southeast Raleigh or from the areas where their shelter is going to be placed?
I believe 3 of them, maybe. One of them doesn't live there anymore, but grew up in the area and went to the daycare along New Bern where Santa Monica Center is. So there are artists that have history with the area.
Okay, awesome. And are they being, well, yeah, because it's the whole corridor. All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? So then with that, is there going to be information on the space that says that the artists are from the area, that gives information about the artist and then ties them to the area of the local corridor?
We do have their biographies on the page, so you can learn more about them. And we can also, I think at this point we could probably go ahead and somehow place information on which stations they're working on. Is that what you're asking for?
Well, no, I'm saying at the stations with the art, is there any place with a bio that also talks about tying the artist to the area, you know, where they're seeing the art on the station? Or will it be their bio, maybe just the name of the piece, or like how will it be displayed that actually shows the connection? Is what I'm asking. That's
a great question. So usually when we put artwork up, we always have some sort of label where people can understand who the artist is and maybe what the content or the tie into the community is. So I don't think we have figured that out yet, but we will take that forward into our next steps. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you for your presentation. All right, so if there are no other questions, we're going to move on. The next item of the agenda is item D. And I believe that is the equity fund, yes. With Jason. How are you, Jason?
Good afternoon, Jason Harden with Planning and Development. So the board had some questions at last month's meeting about stationary planning and specifically the housing bond and potential concept of an equity fund. So we have some more information for you about that, which I'm going to go through. I also have Mark Perlman from our Housing and Neighborhoods Department. He'll be walking through the housing bond section of this. So we can go ahead and go on to the next slide, please. Just a little bit of background on where we are today. We did provide some information last month following up to some of those questions. So what we'll be talking through today, I'm going to skip past some of the information we had last month where there was fewer questions and focus on the topics where there were a few more questions. So we'll be talking about how we got to this point, and then specifically community and economic development recommendations and the housing bond, and also touch on land use and zoning as well. So we can go to the next slide, please. So just kind of a little background. Many of you, I'm sure, are pretty familiar with this, and I know I spoke to this board a couple times, but there probably are some new members. So we did do a lot of planning around the 4 BRD corridors and frequent transit as part of the equitable development around transit plan, which was adopted last year. It began in 2019 and wrapped up a year later, and generally focused on supporting, allowing more people to live and work near transit, and then prioritizing investments and other means of achieving and maintaining affordability near BRT. There already have been some implementation steps. So one of them happened last year, which was changing the city's development code to add an affordability incentive to the zoning code, and that has happened. Right now, that TOD overlay has only been actually placed on properties in a few specific locations, but there's a much more broader application that's underway, which I'll touch on in a couple later slides. And then the housing bond also is a big part of actually implementing a lot of those goals about investing in affordability near transit. So next slide, please. And so this is basically the same information, but geographically presented where we've been and where we're at right now. Some of the updates in terms of planning around transit, which is the equitable development planning, and then BRT planning. So one is applying, I mentioned that transit overlay zone, and I have a couple slides that talk more specifically about what that does, but applying that at least right along the corridor on the western and southern corridors, that's underway now, is going to go through the typical planning commission and city council review and adoption process this spring and summer. And also we recently received a grant from the Federal Transit Administration to do more detailed station area planning on the western corridor, and are looking at beginning that and planning on the southern corridor likely later this year. And that will allow us to do the more specific focus planning we've been doing along New Bern, also along those corridors. I'd also note that there's a northern corridor, which I know you're familiar with, and there's a plan that's getting underway this year to determine the exact alignment and where that northern corridor terminates, which will almost certainly be somewhere outside the belt line rather than stopping short of the belt line as it currently does. And then lastly, what I'll be talking about mostly, stationary planning along New Bern, and then a big part of that is applying that same TOD overlay along New Bern. And the reason why that's a little bit behind, although not much, application of that overlay zone along the southern and western corridors is, given that we have been having these more focused, detailed conversations, wanted to include that as part of those conversations. So next slide, please. And we can go on to the next slide. And so here, this is where I'm going to turn it over to Mark Perlman to talk about the affordable housing bond, and then he'll pass it back to me. And then at the end, we'll have time for any questions.
Thanks, Jason. And Madam Chair and board members, thank you very much for having me. My name is Mark Perlman. I am the Housing Programs Administrator with the city's Housing and Neighborhoods Department. So for the next few slides, what I'd like to do is provide a pretty high-level overview of the bond, what it is, what it funds, how the programs function, and then discuss how the bond funding is going to be tying into transit-oriented development, and talk a little more specifically about some of the current and future investments using the bond funds in the New Bern corridor. So providing just a brief overview of the bond, this was a package that was recommended to City Council after public input coordinated by the Affordable Housing Bond Advisory Committee, approved by 72% of city voters in November of 2020. So pretty overwhelming public support for the bond package. And of course, the end result is that we have $80 million which are earmarked to create and preserve housing, serving households earning incomes up to 80% of the median income, with a focus on lower income households. I'll be discussing some programs in more detail in the following slides, and we'll see that even where there are programs where households up to 80% of the median income are eligible, the supports are more often serving households at lower incomes. And so the bond is set on a 5-year spending plan that started last July 1st. And the objective is to spend down all of the funds, invest them in the community by July 2026. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of the bond. We refer to them as buckets. So the funding has been chopped up into different priorities. These are set, they cannot be changed. This was approved by City Council, and so this is the spending plan that we are following. So we have $12 million for transit-oriented site acquisition. We also have $4 million specifically for transit-oriented NOAA preservation. NOAA stands for Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. That is rental housing that is affordable to folks at low and moderate incomes, but that do not have any sort of legally binding restrictions on the level of rent or who they can serve. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We have $10 million set aside for small scale nonprofit projects. So these are more for infill development and smaller scale rentals. $8 million for voluntary inclusionary zoning housing projects near transit. $10 million for public-private partnerships. That's kind of a broad spectrum of things. $24 million for low-income housing tax credit gap financing. So that's a significant amount of funding, and the city often leverages low-income housing tax credits to create affordable housing, and I'll talk more about that in a few moments. And then $6 million each for owner-occupied home rehabilitation and home buyer assistance, and these are building off of existing programs that Housing and Neighborhoods offers. And one note I want to make about public-private partnerships, we have $10 million set aside. We've already invested $7 million into a forthcoming affordable and supportive housing development that will be in the New Bern corridor. That's Kings Ridge from CASA, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide, please. So digging into, I want to walk through some of these funding allocations and tie them a little more directly to transit-oriented development, as well as specifically what's going on in the New Bern corridor. So as I mentioned, we have $12 million for transit-oriented site acquisition. Numerous departments within the city are coordinating to identify sites that are suitable for multifamily development and specifically leveraging low-income housing tax credit development. And a note on that, the city likes to leverage LIHTC, which is the acronym that we use for that program. The infusion of that equity allows us to create more units and at a greater depth of affordability than would be available without it. So we are trying to leverage that source of funding and supplement it with local funds to bridge any gaps and achieve greater affordability. These properties that are funded with LIHTC are also affordable for at least 30 years, enforceable through covenants, and often local funders such as the city of Raleigh or Wake County may enforce a longer affordability period if we contribute additional financing. And many nonprofit LIHTC developers, DHIC is one that comes to mind, they maintain ownership of the properties that they develop in the long term, so they remain affordable well beyond that 30-year affordability period. We are additionally, can we go back one? So we're also investing $4 million in the Wake County Affordable Housing Preservation Fund. So this is going to be a revolving loan fund administered by a community development finance institution, self-help ventures fund, to acquire and preserve existing housing throughout Wake County. We are investing $4 million with restrictions specifically to support the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing near transit. And then the $8 million set aside for voluntary inclusionary zoning. I think Jason had touched on the density bonus and the requirement of affordability to get that density bonus. So new buildings that want that greater density need to include units that are affordable at 60% of the median income, and they need to remain affordable for 30 years. And this funding is earmarked as gap financing to help make sure that those deals pencil out. And our investment in those properties also allows us some enforcement capability through loan agreements and restrictive covenants. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have $6 million set aside each again for homeowner rehabilitation as well as homebuyer assistance. So as I mentioned, these are existing programs that the Housing and Neighborhood Departments administers. Rehabilitation programs serve elderly households earning up to 50% of the median income. We are evaluating existing programs to see how we can target homeowners near transit as part of our work on updating our affordable housing improvement plan. There are two programs. There is a limited repair program and a substantial repair program. These funds are provided as short-term forgivable loans. So the loans are forgiven after 5 years. So the goal is to help elderly homeowners address critical health and safety issues that allow them to safely remain in their homes. And for homebuyer assistance program, this program serves first-time homebuyers earning up to 80% of the median income, but the majority of the households that we have served are at lower income levels. This program provides up to $20,000 in a 20-year second mortgage that is also forgivable over time. And as with our rehab programs, we are doing work to examine what we can do to develop a supplemental income using the bond funding to specifically get low and moderate income households into home ownership that is transit accessible. And we are also looking at what we can do to better adapt our existing program for the current market situation, which for first-time home buyers and especially low and moderate income first-time home buyers is extremely challenging. Next slide, please. And of course, we have $24 million set aside for low-income housing tax credit development. I've talked a bit about why we like to leverage this funding source. These units primarily serve households earning 60% of the median income and below. It is possible to include units up to 80% of the median income, but the weighted average affordability needs to be 60% and below. So these developments, the majority of the units serve that low income population, 60% and below. They include set-asides for at-risk populations. The North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which administers the tax credit program, requires that 10% of units are set aside for persons living with behavioral health issues. If Wake County is a gap funder, they require that 10% of units are set aside for their tenant-based voucher program that serves households at risk of or experiencing homelessness. To be eligible for city funding, at least 10% of units must be set aside to serve very low income households. And of course, as I mentioned before, when we invest in these properties or support them with gap financing, we are making loans. We enter into loan agreements with the developers, and we make them execute restrictive covenants that tie back to the land. So these affordability restrictions are enforceable. These properties are periodically monitored by the city, by the county, by the state to make sure that they are abiding by the guidelines of the funding agreement. Next slide. So this is a map that points out some of the existing, in process, and upcoming investments in the New Bern Transit Corridor. So number one on the list is Washington Terrace. So this was a redevelopment of an existing rental community. DHIC is the developer. They are a local nonprofit developer and a long-time partner of the city. There are multiple phases of this, including the Village at Washington Terrace, which is 162 affordable family rental units. Booker Park North, which is 72 affordable units for seniors. Booker Park South, which includes 68 affordable units for seniors. And a future development will include 58 for-sale townhomes as replacement housing for some of the housing that was in place. Booker Park South is currently under construction. The Village at Washington Terrace is complete, and Booker Park North is complete. Duplex Village. So this is another existing property located along the corridor. It was acquired by a for-profit developer and was slated for a much higher density and market rate development. The city was able to engage and acquire a portion of the parcel to be set aside for strictly affordable redevelopment. We are going to be doing some site work to set that site up to be released as a request for proposals to engage with a developer to implement an affordable development on that site. Milner Commons is another DHIC development. This is a redevelopment. There's a Presbyterian church right next to Duplex Village. They are leasing the land from the church. They will tear it down and they will build 156 affordable units for seniors. Newbern Crossing, this is a new construction development by Greystone Affordable Housing. They're going to create 192 affordable rental units for families, and this is also going to include at least 40 permanent supportive housing units, and this is being done in partnership with Wake County. So both the city and county are investing in the creation of this. Lane Idlewild references the Cottages of Idlewild. This is a partnership with the Raleigh Area Land Trust, which is a new community land trust organization that is working in the Raleigh area. They're going to create 17 homes in a cottage court style that will include 14 for sale townhomes in the community land trust model. That could be a whole presentation by itself. I'm happy to talk about that with questions at the end, as well as for rental units. And finally, in East College Park, I'm sure everybody is aware of the work that the city has been doing in East College Park. These are infill parcels slated for the development of 90 for sale single-family homes, as well as 51 townhomes. To date, approximately 80 homes have been completed, and we are moving forward with the townhome phase of the project. And then, Jason, I think that you had added the number 7 for upcoming projects to the map. And this actually concludes my section of the presentation. So thank you all for your patience and for listening. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jason.
Thanks, Mark. And I turned off my video because I seem to have some connection issues. So just wanted to make sure I didn't get cut off. We can go on to the next slide, please. I just have a few more. So this is getting back to specifically about the New Bern Station Area Plan and some of the key recommendations that are in the draft. And I have a slide about where we're at in the process. So on top of everything that Mark just talked about, it is, again, recommending specific funding to continue to be devoted towards land acquisition along the corridor, again, beyond what's underway, with an emphasis on housing at or below 60% of AMI and below 30% of AMI. And actually, one thing I would mention, that Kings Ridge project is aimed specifically at people experiencing homelessness. And that actually is one of the, I mentioned a couple of areas where that TOD overlay has already been applied, and that is one of them. So that helped facilitate that emphasis on extremely low income households as a part of that project. Another recommendation is applying that TOD overlay, which I have a couple slides that illustrate in a little bit more detail what that does. Recommendations to allow more housing supply in this corridor, as with the other corridors, again, to reduce competition for existing homes. Recommendation to work with the state of North Carolina to acquire that DMV site, which has a lot of potential for housing and employment opportunities. And then a recommendation to identify some future funding for some smaller scale programs. This is the concept of the equity fund. It's very much a concept at this point. The exact source of funding hasn't been determined, and what it specifically could fund also hasn't been finalized. But the concept is that there would be a dedicated ongoing funding stream for projects or programs such as homeowner repairs, property tax assistance, small business support, public art. And then probably there are some other potential programs that could be funded by that as well. I think there's likely going to be some continued input on that concept, and ultimately that's a council decision for exactly how to set that up, what the funding level would be, and what kind of projects it could fund. So next slide. And then a little bit more specifics, and we touched on this last month, but just to recap about small business and community support, some of these draft recommendations, including support for business in terms of visibility and marketing and other assistance needed during construction, creating a community-based center for information about housing affordability programs, small business support, and so on. That's a space within the community that people can easily approach and access. That DMV site, and then a partnership with St. Augustine's University they have a very strong interest in defining more of a college main street that they feel like would be a real addition to the area around their campus. And whatever the city can do to partner with them and support that is something that I think there's a shared interest in doing, and certainly a recommendation of this plan. And then more broadly, again, working with the university to create and support a cultural district, Black Main Street concept that would include business support, public art, celebration of history and community. Next slide, please. And so last couple slides about the specific land use and zoning recommendations. So what you see outlined there in the darker black line is where that TOD overlay is proposed to be applied. So generally along the corridor where mixed use zones and uses and commercial zones and uses exist along the corridor. In the next couple slides, we can go ahead, illustrate more specifically what that transit overlay district does and doesn't do. So it does limit car-oriented uses and low-density uses. This is designed to support the transit investment by discouraging those kinds of uses that kill walkability and tend to take up a lot of space without providing space for people to live or work. So drive-throughs, outdoor storage, car dealerships, low-density housing. Generally, this wouldn't be something that is placed where those single-family uses exist. But where that is the case, there's provisions where they could certainly be rebuilt if damaged. So it's not designed to make someone's house non-conforming. And generally speaking, it wouldn't apply in those more residentially zoned areas at all. It also requires a more pedestrian-friendly building form. So unlike the picture on the left where there's driveways, no or narrow sidewalks and buildings that are fronted by parking, it would require wider sidewalks, no parking between the building and street, and generally creating a much more comfortable and safe environment for people walking to transit stations or just other daily destinations. Next slide. And this was touched on, but this a little bit more illustration about the density bonus that is a part of that, and which is something, again, that CASA project is taking advantage of. So it does provide a height bonus beyond whatever the zoning would otherwise permit, if at least 20% of those additional units are affordable at 60% or less of AMI and remain affordable for at least 30 years. So there are some long-term requirements that would have to be met for someone to use that bonus. And it does also allow a slightly lower bonus for employment generating uses. Next slide, and we're close to the end. This is a more generalized version of future height in the area with taller heights along those larger parcels, larger shopping centers, further to the east outside the belt line, and still allowing some additional height, but a little bit lower scale, closer to downtown and along the corridor there. Next slide, please. So last slide about the process. Where we're at now is we have these draft recommendations, which conversations like this are helping to refine and finalize. Expect to publish a final document March or probably likely April. We'll deliver that to council in the spring with authorization to initiate application of the TOD zone and other zoning changes along the corridor, spring and summer. So that authorization starts the last of the process. It doesn't conclude it. So there would be meetings on the zoning changes and the other plan recommendations spring and summer, and coming back to city council and planning commission in the fall for a review and a final decision on the zoning changes and the other public investments that are recommended. So with that, that's my last slide, and both Mark and I are certainly happy to take questions if y'all have any.
Madam Chair, I've got a question.
Yes. Thank you for that, Jason. And thank you also, Mark, for your full presentation. Nathan?
Just a quick one, Jason. Did the TOD district set up a requirement for safe crossings, and what do those crossings look like? Because it's what I'm concerned about is New Bern has very sporadic places to cross. The speeds are very, very high, and the crosswalks are generally turn lanes or turn lights as well, which makes it dangerous for people crossing long distances. So I'm hoping that we find a solution within this overlay for that.
Definitely not specific to the overlay, which applies to private property, but this process is looking hard at exactly that question, where there are places where it's not comfortable or not safe to cross. Not so much New Bern, because the BRT project is addressing that with its design, but outside the belt line and some of the cross streets, there are some gaps. I didn't get into it too deeply. I think we had a slide last month that did identify some projects aimed at that exact topic, improving intersections, to add crosswalks, to add or address sidewalk gaps where they exist, and just in general, make sure that there's a safe place for people to get to the stations and wherever else they may be going.
Madam Chair, I have a couple questions.
Yes, Karen.
Okay, Karen Ringe. First of all, thank you very much for coming. I know this has been a lot of work by a lot of people for a long time. My first question is having to do with the spending of the bond money on, and I am very happy to see that you've got a number of strategies for encouraging affordable housing that's transit oriented. And my question is for Mark, when you say transit oriented, is this any transit line, or are we focusing on the BRT corridors across the city?
Both. It is going to be focused around the transit corridors, specifically, for example, with transit-oriented site acquisition, we are really trying to key in on available sites that are in the BRT corridors. Whereas, for example, when we are looking at upgrading or supplementing some of our existing programs, for example, the Homeownership program, proximity to transit as defined as a transit stop that is served by service every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes or better. That's kind of the objective. So we're trying to have a blend to be able to serve existing neighborhoods that are served by transit, but that are outside of the corridors. But a lot of effort is being focused on making sure that there are affordable housing opportunities in proximity to the new BRT corridors.
Okay, that's helpful. And my other question, could you just you mentioned a lot of different, 7 different housing projects in the New Bern corridor. Could you remind us how many total housing units that is approximately? Do you know?
I have it written down. I'd have to total it up and I'll put it in the chat. And actually, Jason, I'm glad that you reminded me about Kings Ridge, because that was not on the map, but that is in the corridor, and that is an additional 100 units. Those are exclusively, so it's going to be at least half of the units will be set aside as permanent supportive housing, and the other half will be affordable for families earning 60% of the median income or below. So let me do the quick tally up, and I'll drop that in the chat.
And I recommendation that whatever that number is, y'all should talk about it, because I was unaware, and I try to pay attention, that there were so many. I mean, there are very few of these I've actually seen in the media. And, does the city council know what the total number is? Are you all talking about it at public hearings and public meetings? Because there have been so many of those around this. So I would encourage you to, whatever that number is, really talk about it, because I think it's important for people to know that we approved that a couple of years ago. So let's remind people what we're actually doing. So, and I probably have some other questions, but I'll stop there because I'm sure other members have questions. Thanks.
Well, and I do appreciate that recommendation. We do want to, share some of our investments and what we view as some of our affordable housing successes in the corridor with the public. And absolutely point taken. I think we should be publicizing that more.
Thank you, Karen. Are there any other questions?
Truman, I have a couple, but I don't have to be next.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Jen.
Mine are a little bit more process oriented. First, I just want to say thank you. I think this depth of presentation is exactly what is useful to help us see what the tie-ins between the work that the other commissions are doing and what we're doing is. So process-wise, I know New Bern is lagging a little bit behind on Western and Southern, but I appreciate the updates there in terms of status. I think as the final reporting that you're talking about for New Bern comes through, and there's some final plans about the kind of intersection interactions with the mapping that Nathan was asking about, I think one question would be, can you guys come back and show those to us? So it's something that we think a lot about. Particularly, I think we're going to, as we move forward with BRT, we're going to be thinking as a transit organization about how people transfer to the BRT from walking and biking and from other bus lines that intersect with it. So those are particularly interesting to me. So I guess the first question is, can we see that again when that comes up this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be glad to come back and talk through that. There's a lot of information here we know, so I think it's always helpful. In addition, we're always happy to give an overview, but in addition to that, come back and focus on a particular topic.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then I know that I have bothered Mr. Eatman about this before, but as we think about that, I think there is probably some overlap between the targets and goals that we set for the BRT in terms of ridership and a lot of these land use decisions and the ridership that we would like to serve. We talk a lot at this board about people who need to ride the bus versus people who choose to ride the bus. Oh, wow. 905 units I'm reading. So as we come in with these affordable housing units along the corridor, we have probably a good estimation of some of that need versus choice ridership that we'll need to look at. So I guess this is maybe more towards transit staff, but I would love to see how the work that y'all are doing in planning and affordable housing plays into the work that we're doing in terms of trip planning and our actual transit planning in terms of goals and metrics that we're setting for ourselves for how the BRT will perform. I know that was a big question. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, so I'll kind of take that. I mean, certainly as we move forward, or as we develop, put it this way, go into ratings applications, things of that nature, to try to get a federally eligible project, we are looking for obviously ridership and things of that nature just to meet the warrants in order to have a project. So once you meet those warrants, and let's say that we're on the other side of the project, and it's actually constructed and completed. I think that the work that we're hearing about now, as far as the overlays go, as far as the affordable housing, that's work that will continue from now through construction and well beyond, construction. As far as ridership, at that point, every community has a little bit of a different take on ridership. Many people value that as the end all be all of the reason that you provide service. And then other communities may view that in a different way of transit as a service, whereas you want to make sure that you have connectivity throughout the community. And while ridership is important, it's not the most important element that's out there. So certainly we can discuss that more as we certainly have traditionally had goals for ridership, but it hasn't to date dictated whether we remove service or expand, or it certainly has determined more on if we have expanded service, but has not dictated on whether we have removed service. We've always approached things that we've wanted to have coverage as well as, quality service. So we have taken some of our resources, and admittedly, we have put those in places where we know that it hasn't been as productive as other areas possibly could be. But that's also provided connectivity to those areas that might not exist otherwise. So, I mean, that's a complex question, I'll say, because we are looking at ways that we can serve some of those areas that might not be as productive today as they could be. And how can we better serve those with transit in something that may not be a 40-foot bus? So certainly, we're trying to expand into those alternative transportation modes, but still providing that connectivity. So I think that's an evolving question that we'll certainly be addressing over the not just months but years as BRT continues to develop and grow. And certainly interested in the board's, your thoughts on that. Really, the premise of what Wake Transit was based on: coverage versus quantity. How much do we want to spread that peanut butter thin, and how much do we want to make sure that we provide really high quality service in those areas that need it the most? So
Thank you, as always, for that context, Mr. Eatman. Yeah, I think I was thinking specifically BRT in this case, which makes it only a slightly smaller question. But I definitely wanted to bring it up as something that I think is key to why we need to have the back and forth conversation, so that Mark and Jason hear why we're asking you guys these questions of what you guys are doing, because it does play into the decisions that we're asked to make. I'm done now. Hand it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jen. Are there any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice with this sunny and then cold weather.
Madam Chair, it's Karen Ringe again. If any other board members have questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, I have one more question.
You can ask yours. I have mine, but I like to wait to the end.
Okay. My question is back to the New Bern station area planning report that's coming out. One of the things you mentioned, Jason, was about a recommendation that would provide City of Raleigh staff support for businesses during the BRT construction. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because I kind of assumed that some of the support for businesses that could be impacted by the BRT construction may be getting financial assistance. And also, if this report hasn't even been approved yet and we're beginning New Bern Avenue construction in the next year, is there enough time to actually provide assistance for businesses? So if you could elaborate, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Definitely, it's both. So the staff support is really important to make sure that there's the communication throughout that process to let businesses know in a very detailed way what's happening, what's going to be happening, so that they can be prepared and do planning for that. And then to make sure that we're hearing from businesses just general concerns, or as specific issues pop up during that construction process, that we're hearing that they have a clear person who they know is the liaison to talk through and who can get problems solved. There also is funding for business improvements, for building upfits and facade grants. And one of the recommendations is to expand on that funding, not just along New Bern, but all the BRT corridors, again, with an eye to improving economic development opportunities for existing businesses along those corridors. So it's both. There's staff and there's funding. And while it's a recommendation of the plan, that's already something that our economic development department and transit staff are thinking about. So it may be that we're set up to do that, And it's not necessarily the recommendation in the final plan that sets all that in motion, that it's already something that we're well prepared to do. But at the least, we think it's important to include it in the plan as well.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I'm assuming you all have a database of the businesses along the corridor. I know that we being you, the city hired some consultants to do a lot of public outreach, and I know we really urged them to create a database, not just businesses, but organizations, churches, et cetera, along the corridor. So hopefully that information they've already been connecting with people. So just as a reminder.
We do have that inventory, and as we get closer and closer, there's going to be a ramping up of communication and outreach to those affected businesses. And I think not just the businesses, but any other residents or property owners are going to have a lot of information during that process.
Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so I have a couple questions. Well, one, I think it's interesting that I'm hearing that we're, as a transit system, we're transitioning away from ridership and into coverage. But I think it's important that we do that, especially if the BRT is going to impact our ridership, which it is. So I think it's a timely thing that we're doing on the staff side of things. I think we need to focus on ridership, because focusing on ridership then makes sure that we're maintaining our coverage in support of those who actually need public transit versus people who just like to ride it to go to the state fair and things of that nature. Which is bringing me to the question of the 109 units of affordable housing that we talked about. How many of those units actually rely on public transit of the people who may live in those units, right? Because just because somebody's on affordable housing doesn't mean they rely on public transportation. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to help the situation or us making sure that we're actually providing coverage to the people who actually need public transportation. But again, if we're not focused on ridership because we're moving the people who need public transportation out, it makes sense for us to focus on coverage. My other thought is, with the transit acquisition, is there a requirement for the number of units or percentage of total rent collected revenue from the space for each of those units? So I understand that we're able to provide that there'll be these units. Some of them are completely, I'm talking about new development more so. As we build new development and we're asking about affordable housing and suggesting that we provide them with some assistance for providing that, I want to make sure that a developer doesn't come in, build a substantial unit, add 10 affordable housing units, and then they check that box. So is there a requirement for the percentage of affordable housing units in a development that we're supporting?
So for, you asked specifically about transit-oriented site acquisition. And so the plan is for those sites that have been acquired, they need to be 100% affordable. Most often, again, because we leverage low-income housing tax credit developments, and actually in North Carolina, other states, you can do a tax credit development that has a market rate component. In North Carolina, you cannot. And so there needs to be, if not 100% affordable, majority affordable for those sites that we're acquiring. And when we are entering into a gap financing agreement with the low-income housing tax credit development, those are 100% affordable, and they need to remain 100% affordable for the length of the term of the loan. And that can range up to 40 years.
Okay, and is there any requirements on new development? I know there's something that's iffy, that we have some, stringent laws around, but is there any requirement, any support in the affordable housing bond referendum for new development? And is there a requirement for that new development to have a certain percentage of affordable housing?
No, there is not. In North Carolina, I think as you referenced, in North Carolina, mandatory inclusionary zoning is actually not permitted by state law. There have been Supreme Court cases where it got shot down. I wish we could do it. I honestly do. I think it's a really effective system for creating a significant number of affordable housing units, but we are not granted that power expressly by the state. And so we are not able to require that all new development include a percentage of affordable housing. And that's why I think through the analysis that was done, it was determined that a voluntary program was best, encouraging developers to seek that additional density in exchange for implementing long-term affordable units.
Is that even if we're supporting them in the affordable housing bond program?
If any affordable housing bond money is being invested into a housing development, it is for affordable housing. And so there is a requirement. This money is not designed at all to support market rate development.
Okay. And the homeowner rehab, what are the requirements for elderly homeowners to like have access? Oftentimes we hear that people don't know these programs exist. So is it something that is auto-enrolled for them? Is there going to be canvassing, not just signage on the website? Because we also have to take into account that some of these elderly homeowners don't have, aren't as technologically savvy. So is this something that is an auto-enroll program that's grandfathering in people who's lived in this area? Or how are people being able to gain access to, what are requirements for them gaining access to the program?
So it is an application-based, both programs are application-based. So the substantial rehab program is operated in-house, and we are working on better ways to publicize this for the reasons that you mentioned. We had acquired a pretty significant interest list of people who had contacted the department and expressed interest in the program. The other day, we released mailers to everybody on that interest list, which included program information and application and instructions to apply. The limited repair program, and I'll get to sort of the eligibility in a second, but the limited repair program, we subcontract with an organization called Resources for Seniors, and they are able to advertise and intake for that program. And so we route it through them. And so as shown in the presentation, 50% of the median income and below must be elderly. For substantial rehab, must have 3 or more failing systems. So for example, your HVAC is out, your roof is falling in, and you have serious plumbing issues. Because those loans are up to $90,000. So this is for significant work to your home. The limited repair program, actually last year we went and we increased the limit on funds per homeowner from $7,500 to $15,000. But that is for fewer than 3 failing systems, so more limited repair. And again, we're really focused on critical health and safety issues. This is not necessarily a cosmetic rehab program. This is really about safety and security of folks to be able to stay in their homes.
All right, perfect.
To your question about enrolling people, that's a big part of the concept of in the community information center that I touched on briefly, to have a physical presence where people know this is how I can gain access or get information about these city programs, whether it's something about the homeowner repair program or affordability in general or small business support. And a very related approach that we've used with a lot of success has been the idea of community ambassadors, which is paying members of the community to help do more focused door-to-door, even outreach, to let people know about programs, and relatedly also let people know, existing homeowners know, in addition to about the repair program, just providing them with information about the value of their property is important, because we want to make sure when there is a property transaction, if someone wants to sell their property, that's great. But we want to make sure that everybody involved in that transaction has the best information possible. Sometimes it's one-sided, and we want to make sure that people know the value of their property.
Thank you for that. And to Mark or either of you, are these initiatives connecting to current programs that elderly residents are using, instead of reinventing the wheel, making sure that, like, even if you have something in the community, a physical location, if nobody knows it's there, if only certain people in areas know it's there, and those who really need it or those in other areas that might fall short don't know it's there, then that's another issue. So I'm asking also, are you all connecting to other community, be it county, city, whatever, funded or local small grassroots organizations that support elderly residents that can also help you all with this piece to make sure that they know about resources that's going to be available to them?
Yeah, and part of our work plan is to conduct outreach to community organizations that can help us advertise, that can help people that can help with the intake process. For example, so we have a staff person who's responsible for the substantial repair program, and they have sat down at a table one-on-one and helped people fill out their applications. And we've been talking about better leveraging, almost creating a, so for homeless services, there is what's called coordinated entry. So everybody approaches it. I'm probably covering material that people are familiar with, but there's one access point, and it's a network of organizations that help people get access to services. And if we could create a similar type of system for our specific programs that target the elderly, I see that as something that would be beneficial. That is a work in progress. I am really glad actually that you brought this up. I think that there is progress to be made. We can do better to work with this particular client base. And so that is something that is on the radar and that we were working towards.
And I thank you for that, because that's part of why and to that end, I want to thank you and Jason for all your hard work. You've always come to our meetings, but I want to thank you for coming to the meeting also to do this presentation for us, because a lot of the decisions that we make overlap, and we don't always see that. We can be very, horse with the blinders on, looking straight ahead, making decisions on housing, making decisions on transit, and not realizing how those decisions may be overlapping and hurting each other. Because I also want to make sure that if there's any information we can give you or come present on that end that's going to help bolster what we're doing with affordable housing around transit, that we're doing it. So I want to say that's why we're here, and thank you all for being a part of this. And I have just a couple more questions. Are those elements retroactive? So maybe you all are at that point to put all the details, but maybe thinking about once these launch, that elderly people may have an opportunity to retroactively enroll in the program if they didn't know about it originally. That just kind of popped into my head while I was just thinking about it.
Sure. So if somebody was not aware of the program and they are made aware, so we are going to, it's an application process. So anybody who has not received services and falls within the eligibility window of, they meet the income and the age and the 3 or more failing systems requirement for substantial rehab, for example, everybody has an opportunity to apply to the program. We do have, I will be frank, right now we are in an environment where it is challenging to find contractors. We do have a small group of reliable contractors to do the work, but the volume of work that we can do is constrained by that factor. So that is something to keep in mind. So we're moving to a system where there is a closed enrollment period. It will reopen periodically as resources, as work becomes available. And so if somebody applies and they are not able to get in with that round, they can reapply. As long as they are eligible, they can continue to reapply.
Awesome. And is there metrics that scores transit friendly, just outside of of course, the ones we're talking about affordable housing, but those that we can't, grab or measure because of legalities? Is there some sort of metrics that we're scoring to score transit-friendly housing development? And anybody can answer it if you all know. That then we can kind of use, and maybe for any other reason. But is there a metrics that we're using to score other transit that we're not acquiring, that's being newly developed, that is transit-friendly?
Sure. So it is. So there are a couple of things that we do. So we are able to provide a land acquisition grant for developers that want to develop on parcels that are transit friendly. That is one of the criteria. And then proximity to transit is also, it's worked into our evaluation of funding requests in a number of different ways. There is, just the direct numeric score, for every development, we fill out a score sheet to see if it qualifies. Proximity to transit is one of those factors. Also, we have a housing location policy, and this is, there may be some shifts around this in the future, but right now, for a family development, you can get an exception to this location policy. So we're trying to avoid warehousing affordable housing. There has long been a history of only allowing affordable housing to be developed in areas that are where there is a concentration of poverty or that are a majority minority. We want affordable housing opportunities to be spread out geographically So our housing location policy kind of codifies that, but you can get an exception to that if your development is located in proximity to transit.
Awesome, thank you for that. And as we talk about the affordable housing.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Jen.
Oh, I had two thoughts. One, I know you have more questions, so I wanted to interrupt you if that's okay.
No, it's all right. Good.
One was when you were talking about the need for information going out, and Jason mentioned like an information center as part of the recommendation. I think at our last meeting or the one before, we talked about the need to let people have help with their transit planning and commute planning, or having a phone number they could call and things like that. So potentially having transit staff at an information center like that, if it were to exist, or at least accessible to that information center, is a good overlay as well. And then more to what we were just talking about in terms of the whether the overlay encourages a certain type of transit-friendly development. I think that the parking limitations, which Nathan was talking about and Jason has just put in the chat, are really critical to that. By not having parking minimums, that means people will build less parking lot and build more building and more houses. So I think that's a really critical piece of actually having something that's more transit friendly, specifically where we map the TOD. And then I did have one question. There's been a lot of talk nationwide about switching from level of service for transportation projects to vehicle miles traveled. Is the city of Raleigh using vehicle miles traveled when they analyze new projects?
Not currently, but there's been a lot of thought recently put into that exact question for the reasons that you mentioned. Focusing on level of service tends to drive ever more construction of wider streets and other ways of facilitating driving, which simultaneously discourage transit use and walking because they degrade the environment for walking and transit use. So that is something that staff has been looking at pretty closely. That said, I would note that we already do that to an extent when it comes to analyzing rezonings. We include as a part of that, and this actually goes to an earlier question as well. We include as a part of that noting whether or not the potential project is near transit, the level of walkability and transit service that it has, and basically concluding if that's the case and people who are going to live or work in that area are more likely to walk or use transit and less likely to drive, then there's a positive effect in terms of vehicle miles traveled, pedestrian safety, and carbon emissions. And so that's something that explicitly gets factored into that analysis and decision from City Council.
Thank you, Jason. Well, since I want to piggyback on jump to my other question before that question, do we know, well, how will the TOD standards impact current businesses that exist on the corridor? Or not just on New Bern, but I mean going forward, but using New Bern as an example, how will the TOD standards impact those businesses?
Right, they can continue even if they are in one of those categories, say a car dealership. They wouldn't be permitted by that overlay zoning district. They can continue to operate. They can make repairs. It doesn't in any way limit their ability to do that. What it does mean, if there's a vacant piece of property, they would not be allowed to create a new drive-through or car dealership or any of those other prohibited uses.
All right, thank you. And then one other question. I know that we talked about how many units that we were going to be having, but have you all calculated how many affordable housing and low income housing units we may be losing?
That is, there have been estimates. I don't know if there are estimates specific to the New Bern corridor. I know that, for example, the county has taken a look at the number of affordable units that are being lost countywide. But those are some estimates that need to be updated.
Okay, thank you. And Those are all my questions. Thank you very much for running my gauntlet of questions on affordable housing and for this bond referendum. And thank you for you all coming to present to us to help us make sure that we understand this more. To me, and I think I can speak for the rest of the authority, it shows that we care, and that the more that we do these cross-functional spaces where we can just update each other, we can have more information that makes us make our decisions better, your decisions better. So if there's anything that you all don't have from us or any presentations that I'm sure staff, Go Raleigh is amazing, so I'm sure they're sending you everything you need, but I just want to make sure that we're keeping that space open, even for you all or planning or anybody, to make sure that we're all doing this together, because we're all in it together, and we don't want to make any decisions that make anybody else's decisions any harder. So thank you, Mark and Jason. Does anybody else have any other questions? Anything to add? Yeah, I think that was pretty thorough. Appreciate you. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next item of our agenda. If there's nothing else, thank you all. To the item C, which is the COVID policy update with David Walker.
All right, good afternoon. David Walker, City of Raleigh. We presented some of this verbally to Route Committee last week on the 1st. They had some conversation there and then requested that we go ahead and bring this to the full board this week. It's being presented as an information item, but staff would request that the board consider going ahead and taking action if they so choose. So with that, go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a real brief history of the subject, just talking about COVID policies. Everybody's aware COVID pandemic began back in the early spring of 2020. Shortly thereafter, TSA issued the first of many mandatory mask mandates on public transit vehicles and stations. Go Raleigh implemented about the same time their seating restrictions on board the Go Raleigh buses, and suspended fares and closed their front doors. Last August, we came to the Transit Authority Board requesting that the front doors be reopened and that we remove our seating restrictions due to our increases in ridership. And at that meeting, the board did vote to remove the seating restrictions, but asked that we continue to hold on reopening the front doors. And so that's why we're back today, is to continue that conversation about the front doors. So next slide. The current TSA mask mandate does expire next Friday, the 18th. And we've not seen or heard any indications that the TSA is expecting to continue or extend that mask mandate. So it's very likely that effective March 19th, passengers will be able to board the buses without wearing their mask, and we would have no authority to require they wear those masks. I've copied a very brief quote from a letter that was sent to the White House from APTA, which is the American Public Transit Association. And I guess the thing I'll point out is that last line where they're stating an extension to the mask mandate beyond the 18th would likely increase growing enforcement challenges that operators and agencies are already seeing with the public. So we just really don't anticipate that mask mandate is going to be extended, and there doesn't seem to be any support for that. Next slide. Our ridership year to date, we're at about 72% of the pre-COVID ridership totals. And although we hope that's a pretty good number, we think that it could be actually a little bit higher, because it's actually kind of hard for the drivers to get a good count when large numbers of people are boarding through the back door. It's easy to get a good count when they're at the front door because they're right there passing by and you can get a good count. But when they're coming through the back door in big numbers, it's potentially could be off a little bit. We are hearing complaints about, small incidences where people are bumping into each other everybody wants to be the first off, and everybody also wants to be the first ones to jump on the bus. So people are trying to come in and exit at the same time. We have had some incidences with customers getting into small scuffles due to that. Other challenges are that the buses have no kneeling feature that would assist at the back door, making it a little bit more challenging for families with small children or senior citizens having to make that bigger step. We will note that they can always use the front door, but in most cases they don't. They just go ahead and elect to make that bigger step at the back door. Next slide. Some good news that we have talked about in the past. Morgan Simmons on our staff presented last September about the air changeover in onboard buses. The typical office building or the house that you're sitting in today, air exchanges on average 4 to 6 times per hour. On board our bus, we're 2 to 3 times more frequent than that, at roughly 12 times per hour. And if there are multiple windows open on board those buses, that air exchange can be as high as 50 times per hour. So there's good airflow on board the buses to make sure that, you know, we're constantly refreshing and getting good air inside the bus. Just a reminder that we did install driver barriers in the fall of 2020 to help protect our bus operators. To date, 76% of Wake County residents have had the vaccine, at least one shot. 73% have had both shots. So we're well over the 70% mark in Wake County. And if you're watching the news, you're seeing the same thing that we are. The number of positive cases in the last several weeks to months has been drastically dropping. So all indications are that the pandemic is I'm going to knock on wood, slowly coming to an end. Next slide. Concerns that we have with the mask mandate potentially coming to an end next Friday is that we'll now have passengers boarding and exiting through that same door, potentially without masks. Some customers obviously are going to opt to continue wearing their mask, but I'm quite sure there's going to be those that are not going to be wearing a mask. So if somebody that does have a mask is forced to use that same door as someone without a mask, it could, you know, raise their anxiety levels. Opening that front door, getting things back to normal just creates a much better flow. People getting in the front, exiting out the back. You don't have that potential for conflict, which also creates more engagement requirements with the driver. When you do have those conflicts, then he has to get engaged at times, which potentially could put him at a higher level of exposure. Next slide. We did do some more canvassing, talk to our regional partners. At this time, there are none of our local regional transit agencies that are keeping their front doors closed. I think when we brought this back in August, Go Triangle was the only other agency locally that had their front doors closed, and they have since reopened them. So in the region, Go Raleigh is the only agency still keeping their front door closed. Next slide. We also reached out to agencies across the state. And back in August, you know, we did have several that still kept their front doors closed, but all of the canvassing that we did in the last week, we were not able to find any agencies in the state of North Carolina other than Go Raleigh that had their front doors still closed. Next slide. So just recapping, you know, considering our customers' needs and the safety of our passengers and operators, our ridership does continue to climb each month, and you know, with $4 and potentially $5 per gallon gasoline, there's expectations that our ridership is going to even climb at a higher pace than what we have seen over the last, you know, 6 months. We do have those citizens that are still complaining about the back door being or the front door being closed, and we're at a 76% vaccination rate. So on the next slide, just want to open it up for conversation and discussion. Staff's recommendation would be that the board consider reopening the front door in association with the date that the mask mandate expires.
Hey,
That would-
David,
Yes.
if I could, in true pandemic form, I'm gonna kind of do something on the fly here. But as you can see, I think that certainly from your presentation that all of our, regional agencies have opened the front door. I think it increases passenger flow, and it's just a little more intuitive for folks to enter and exit, as certainly as our ridership could potentially reach pre-pandemic levels in the next 3 to 4 months if fuel prices stay at the levels that they are now and potentially even increase. With that said, for full disclosure, and as things have continued to change throughout the pandemic, TSA has announced that it will extend the mask mandate till April 18th. So that happened actually as David Walker started talking. So that just shows you, the environment that we still remain in. That may actually make the decision easier, or it can make it harder depending upon how you think about the front door. I would say that we still want to open that front door when possible. Again, operationally, I think that is the right thing to do. But we will have a TSA mandate for masks on buses through April 18th. I just wanted to make sure, again, for full disclosure, that we did put that out there, since that just did come across.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Nathan.
this is Nathan Spencer. I just want to provide some context for how we were discussing it en route and why we asked to bring this to the full board to have more discussion. In part, one of the reasons we did was the hope that we had asked staff to have an operator available to speak to the board regarding their concerns or blessing to this change in policy, which it doesn't sound like we have one. David, do we?
We did not bring an operator, here today just for time considerations. I can say that we had staff down at Go Raleigh Station, and thank you for reminding me. I didn't have that in my slides, so I forgot it. But we did go down to Go Raleigh Station. We talked to many bus drivers as well as many riders. Frankly, I was a little bit surprised at the mix of reaction to the question, would you be open to the front doors being reopened at some point in the near future? And a good number of them, I would say probably 30%, said yes. Several of those stated that they were already opening the front door regularly themselves, which Ms. Truman even confirmed she had seen that happening as she rides the bus on a regular basis. About 30% of them, I would say, were no, just a flat out no. And then I would say the other 30 to 40% were just kind of, wishy-washy. They said, it really doesn't matter. I open my door if somebody asks. If they don't ask, I don't open it. But there wasn't an overwhelming no, which is quite frankly what we were expecting when we went down there to do that. If most of the riders that we asked were overwhelmingly yes, it's time to open the front doors, makes it a little bit easier for them to get on the bus, mainly for that reason.
Thank you, David. And I appreciate you going down and polling folks. We discussed it en route. We also came to a split point where we weren't, sort of 1 and 1 in terms of how we felt about it. I have heard from operators about concerns about fears of being exposed, that, mask mandates have been relaxed, but this is not gone. And that they are, their question tends to be, if, we're not collecting fares, what's the point of opening that front door? There was also, I did speak to some of the folks in more leadership positions with operators, and there is a concern to losing operators. based on that from folks not being comfortable. So that is something we should consider, but I want to make sure that there is discussion based on it, especially since there was quite a discussion en route. I think that more discussion, more voices is helpful.
Hi, Nathan. This is Sarah Prado. Quick question. Were you talking about the operators not being comfortable because of the front door being open, or not being comfortable because the front door wasn't open?
That's a good question. Weren't comfortable with the idea of the front door being opened.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your feedback. Oh, so are we saying that because the TSA has just changed the mandate recently to move this to April, that we're waiting till then? Has that recent update that just happened while we were on this call changed anything that you all were suggesting to us? Or
Well,
not?
Not from a staff level. I think that obviously if you keep the mask on, some could view that the removal of the mask is a significant sign that there's lower risk. And so, open the front door. Or you could think that, well, you're actually now have an extra layer of protection anyway through April 18th. So use the front door. So I think you could view that in a couple of different ways. It just depends on what your outlook is. Also, you could probably view that in a negative way as well, saying that, that there must be some continued risk since they're requiring masks through April 18th. So again, I still think, from an operation standpoint, we're reaching that, 3/4 of our pre-pandemic ridership, which for us, for peak periods, is pretty substantial on some of our routes. And using the rear door only, it can be challenging. Certainly, we're interested in safety. We most definitely, that's what's number one. But we are also in an environment where we seem to be the last agency that we can find that is adhering to a front door closed policy. So we're certainly putting it out there for consideration, but certainly understand that that's a tough decision whenever you think about any type of safety item. So completely understood.
Thank you for that. Jen, it looks like you have a question or a comment.
I was just gonna say that I spoke in committee in favor of opening the front door. I think I actually feel more comfortable speaking in favor of opening the front door, knowing that we'll still be having masks through April 18th. I'm not terribly surprised the TSA extended that, given how cautious the federal government wants to be about reopening things. And I would say that I think it would actually make mask enforcement simpler if the bus driver can actually see the faces of the people that are getting on the bus. It's certainly easier to get on the bus at the front door, and especially on our sites that don't have sidewalk next to them. So when appropriate after discussion, I'd be willing to make that motion.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm in the presence of, once the mandate is lifted, if the mandate is in, let's leave it in and add the precautions that are there. But once the mandate is lifted, I'm of the mind, my personal opinion is to maybe request / encourage people to continue wearing their mask on the bus. And of course, we, with the bus flow, we don't want to, if we're encouraging that, then, but if the mandate is lifted, are we getting back to charging for fares anytime soon, or we don't have any information on that?
So what we presented to the Finance Committee and to the Transit Authority at the last meeting was that currently our proposed budget does not contain fares for FY23, which would carry us fare free through June 30 of 23. That does not mean that would be upheld by council. That is a council deliberation that will have to be approved by them through budget approval, which will happen obviously sometime in late May or early June probably. But again, we did disclose to the board that at our level, we have proposed a balanced budget for FY23 without imposing fares at this time.
And this is just the information item. Y'all don't need our vote on this.
If you would like for us to, we are requesting to, as part of this discussion today, to return to front door boarding, which would take a consensus of the board. So we did present it as information because we didn't know, obviously that's what we're doing. We're presenting it as information. With the information provided though, if the board would like to move forward with opening the front door, that would take a motion and a vote. If, for us to know that your wishes on that.
Okay, any feedback or insight from the board on that, the authority?
So this is LaTanya. Can you hear me?
Yes, LaTanya.
Okay, so I just want to make a comment. So I don't think there's a limit like we have of riders on the bus. So I know there was before, it was like only a certain amount of people can ride and then the bus will move on. So if that limitation has been removed, maybe we can consider opening the front door. So if there is a limit, then I would say maybe keep the doors closed. But if there's no cap of number of riders, then I'm open to open the front door.
Yes, so that was a motion, and Mr. Walker, you might have to help me with this, but I think that was actually removed back in August of 21.
That's correct. And voted on in August and then made effective, I believe, the 1st of September.
I think Linda Davis was trying to speak earlier.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Linda, we can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I just wanted to say that it sounds to me like we are asking riders to continue, we're complying with the mandate and we're obviously going to continue wearing masks through April 18th. I think if we're the only system that still is not opening the doors, I would definitely propose that we go ahead and open doors, hoping that our drivers continue to enforce riders to wear their masks, and they can see that easier when people enter through the front door. It just seems like that it's almost like we're phasing back into normalcy. So I definitely propose that we start opening the front doors.
Thank you for that. I agree with you. I mean, in some measure, like if whether we are lifting the mask mandate or making sure that we maintain it, that back door being open and people being able to enter in and out of it has never helped us with maintaining or enforcing wearing masks or social distancing or anything like that on the bus. If anything, that was not helpful. But it was helpful in making sure that we were able to get people on and off and having multiple spaces, but maybe even opening that back door probably caused more struggle than necessary, with people fighting it's like riding a metro somewhere or L train somewhere and they say wait till the people get off, but y'all at the door fighting because they're trying to get on while you're trying to get off. Is there any more comments to the effect? Oh, Joshua.
Yeah, I have just one comment. I would like to see, so I'm also in favor of the front door being open, but I would also like to see the barriers remain for the operators. And I know that might become complicated once we start taking fares, but since we are not taking fares, I would like to see those barriers remain available to the operators.
Yes, so those barriers are hard installations, and they are actually equipment on all new buses as well. So the plexiglass barriers will certainly remain, as well as all new equipment will be installed with those as well.
Good, thank you.
And David Walker, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a standard specification now for all of our buses.
It is, yes.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'll make a motion that we return to front door operations with the barriers in place.
All right, the motion's been made that we return to front door operations as the flow of boarding for our buses with maintaining COVID barriers for drivers and the mask mandate, I would assume, until April in place. And I want to add to that, if I may, that we still, after April, at least encourage or not require, but encourage or request the signage on the bus so that people kind of maintain a mask situation on the bus.
I'll accept that friendly amendment and just say that I think that the Parks Department already has those encourage mask signs, so we should just steal theirs.
It works for me. I'm about using all the things of all the people to do all the things in the city. So that has been the motion. Does anybody have a second?
This is LaPondale, second.
All right, thank you. It has been moved. I'm sorry. Properly seconded. Sorry, I'm doing something that's not, what is that? What's happening? I don't know what's happening. Never mind that. All right, so I will do a roll, please, by aye or nay. Vote your support. Jennifer Truman.
Aye.
Joshua Gill.
Aye.
LaPonda Edmondson.
Aye.
Karen Ridge.
Aye.
Latanya Williams.
Aye.
Linda Davis.
Aye.
Nathan Spencer.
Nay.
Threw me off, Nathan. Sarah Prado.
Aye. I'm on the fence, but aye.
All right, thank you. So it looks like the space has passed. I'm going to abstain to Lupe Abukaya, abstaining from vote. But the motion has been passed that we go ahead and return back to the regular flow of our bus system operations. Leaving in the barriers and requiring mask mandates until after April's mandate lift, and then still encouraging mask usage on the bus.
Thank you. This is David Walker, City of Raleigh. Just a quick follow-up on that signage. We have had some internal conversations about what that signage may look like, and it's likely that we're going to maintain signage that looks almost identical to what we have today, that where it says mandatory. We'll just replace mandatory with requested. So it'll look very similar, but just say mask requested.
That works perfectly. It will trick people into thinking they're still supposed to wear their mask. I'm for that as well. So thank you for that. Thank you, David, for your presentation and speaking to us on this matter. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item A. If we don't have any other questions, which is the RTA retreat overview and next steps. So let me pause really quickly here before we jump into that, because we are now here at 5:30, which leads us into probably not wrapping up for another 30 to 45 minutes. And I want to make sure the authority is in space to have that amount of time to give to the rest of the meeting before we jump into this last staff information item before we get into committee items.
Madam Chair, it's Karen Ringe. Since we didn't get to do committee reports at the last meeting, maybe we could postpone the RTA retreat discussion, especially because CJ emailed it to everyone and we could have read it ourselves.
And Madam Chair, I can provide a 90-second or less overview of what the board may want to look at if they have not had the opportunity to look at that document. And I can review that literally in less than a minute and a half.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna hold you to that. And I'm setting a timer because it's gonna go off when
it is going to take Andrea's help, and she's already done it.
I don't know. I'm trying to do that now. You already said it was going to say.
All right. So no, she's good. She's already there. So within the document that I sent, there is a section that says retreat priority initiatives. So we would like the board to look at those initiatives. They're listed here in rank order as they were developed by the board. So as we develop the work plan for the RTA, and we really need to get a work plan developed traditionally the RTA has presented the Wake Transit Plan. Really, our element is our work plan. But certainly, I think we need to add elements that are specifically from the Transit Authority. What are your initiatives for the coming year? So above and beyond what we've presented to you for the 23 budget as our elements that we want to move forward with, which of these things, or is it all of these things that you would like for us to work on? So again, this is what the priority was as we developed that at the retreat. And so please look at those. Next slide, please. And there's only 2 slides. And so also in that retreat, there's things that transit staff can't do directly that were really of interest to the board. So things like land use planning and, affordable housing, coordination with regional partners, which we can certainly facilitate, but not that we can't do directly ourselves. So there's these other, indirect influences out there as well. So look at those in that retreat summary as well. And then as we go back to our committee meetings, I'll have a quick discussion in each committee, as well as I'll come back to the board in April. And hopefully we can maybe choose a few items or maybe many of these items from both of these lists to add to what the Wake Transit Plan will be implementing in FY23. And what staff will do at that point is develop an outline of what a work plan might look like for FY23 for adoption by the board. So that's my quick presentation, but please look at the information that CJ sent over, and we'll be ready to talk to you more about this in committees and at the full board meeting in April. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, David. That was almost auctioneer style running through the presentation. I do have a quick suggestion. If we can have maybe a survey sent to the board that we can go ahead and rank our priority prior to our meeting in April, so that when we meet in April, there's some information that we've already sent out to you all that makes that conversation a little more streamlined. I think it's a great conversation for us to have in person. It's probably a better conversation for us to have in person.
We'll certainly get that out.
All right, perfect. And we're gonna jump to the committee reports. I know the first committee report is always Route. Route, do you mind switching place with marketing? Nathan?
Go for it, Karen.
Thank
Oh, you know what? I'm not
So, Karen,
actually.
to keep-
I appreciate that, but you know what? I'm not. So go ahead.
Well, did you want to ask your question really quickly? If there wasn't a lot that you wanted to present for marketing?
Okay, all right. Actually, I can be ready. I'm sorry. I just was all right. Well, first of all, I'm just wondering if we should go ahead and let me first of all report on a couple of really exciting things that we learned about at the marketing committee meeting just last week. The first of which is this March is an opportunity to show appreciation for all of our transit staff. And the marketing committee did talk about, and this is following up on conversations we've been having since December about ways during this time of COVID, we can really express our appreciation for all of the hard work and the extra time that all of our transit staff put in to provide safe transportation in the city. And our marketing, our communication staff came up with some suggestions for placards we can put on buses and digital screens. And Andrea is going to show a couple of the ones that we liked, if that's okay. Because we really want to encourage all of our bus riders to just say, hey, thank you. Do we have those or not yet, Andrea? Okay, I'm not sure where that is. So I also want to mention another really excellent thing that happened this recently, that our communication staff were recipients of Raleigh Public Relations Society Awards for their achievement in some pretty creative ways to really market and communicate public transit. They had created a really neat video, "You Can Count on Us," which is real. What the message was, this was from last year, about no matter what's happening with COVID, you can count on the bus running and running safely and on time. They also won an award for their Commute Smarter, Not Harder, a talk about encouraging walking as a different form of transportation. What a unusual thing. And they also received an award for the print ad campaign that we have been running for the last at least half a year, since last July, to ways to encourage people to just ride the bus. And we've had an integrative print ad campaign going on. And if any of you are paying attention, I've seen it in the Indie Week. It's been in the Triangle Business Journal. It's been in the Carolinian, on the News and Observer websites. Some really fun and bright ads to encourage people to ride the bus. So first of all, kudos to Andrea and Kristen and our Commute Smart staff, because we really appreciate all the awesome work that they've been doing, and they've been recognized with these awards. Related to that, I did want to mention an idea that I had in looking at the coming out about, and you all have seen at the pumps, the record high gas prices. And it seems to me that this would be a super opportunity to remind the community that right now they can ride the bus for free. And which I think still is a message that we can do more to get the word out about. So, and related to that, we did report, I think we reported at the full board that Go Raleigh, along with Go Triangle, Go Cary, and Go Durham have all been participating starting at the end of January in daily hits about riding public transit through WRAL FM's traffic report. They gave us an opportunity to pay them to reach upwards of over 400,000 adults every week, over half of which they believe are people who actually commute. So when people are in their cars driving, and getting the traffic reports, they're getting a PR message about, have you thought about using public transit? So what I'd like to recommend to staff, and maybe you've already thought of it, I don't know, is if we can plug in some of those short messages about the cost of gas. Hey, you could be paying this high price of gas, or you could be riding the bus for free. So it's really just a recommendation to staff to incorporate that into our current marketing campaign that we're doing on the radio and online with WRAL's traffic report that's happening 5 days a week. I don't know if there's any comment on that from the board or staff.
In regards to, we agree about the gas prices and the bus being free. Currently, we have already started taking advantage of that. We got a great video and article both on CBS and WRAL yesterday that we've been sharing on social, and that will go out in our newsletter tomorrow. So yes, we are trying to get the word out there. And again, we had a nice ride along with WRAL, and then CBS also came out to the station.
Wow, that's awesome. So glad to hear it.
Yes, it's nice to get a good story.
Well done. I'm really thrilled to hear that. Thank you. Let's see, what else have I left out of my report?
I don't have your assets for the appreciation, because there's some words that had been requested change, like we were moving from staff to team, things like that. So I don't have the final one, but I will bring that back to the full board when we have the final versions for everybody to see, if that's all right.
That's fine. And I just rest assured the marketing committee looked at these and provided and we're excited to move forward with this. I also want to mention that on March 18th, it is Transit or Bus Operator Appreciation Day. It's part of a national campaign, and so it only makes sense that we're doing this at the same time, and our staff will be reaching out especially to our bus operators. So I think that is the main thing. Other than the last thing on our agenda for the marketing committee was we did get some, we got a presentation from David Walker and David Eatman about the equity fund concept that we heard a little bit about already from Jason Harden. And so I don't need to go into that because I think we've already covered it. So that's marketing committee's report.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. I do have a quick question. So if Operator Appreciation Day is the 18th, that ad is going to be coming out. I'm sorry if I missed that. It's going to be launching the 18th or will be out before the 18th?
Our goal was to have it running all next week, to begin next week, but we can hold till March 18th. Because we didn't put any dates on it, we thought we would just continue running it on the digital buses for, an extended amount of time.
I mean, to me, if it's already out there, it's out there. But I just didn't know if we were going to be launching it or anything. If we had already put it out there, we're going to do something extra special to highlight it on the 18th or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, we're definitely going to be doing a lot of social that day for it. So, because it's nationwide, and that's really, some photos, some thank yous sort of thing, and, liking and sharing other people's items as well.
Is it possible to switch the digital billboard on the buses on that day, saying today is, Bus Driver Appreciation Day or whatever it's being called, whether it's operator or driver? Is that
we could also do something on the front of the bus. Yeah, let me think about those options and talk to operations. We can definitely somehow make that very clear on the 18th.
And can I also ask, are the digital billboards stationary or do they move?
So they're the ones in the bus when you're riding on the bus that say no food, no drink, please wear headphones instead of, listening to music aloud sort of thing. You know what I'm talking about? Those screens that you have two in the bus, one front and the back.
I'm just wondering if there's a way to put both there. One that says today is, and then still having the other ad.
Oh, yeah. When we run your ads that you all picked, we're going to run them all in a loop.
Okay, perfect.
Does that work?
No, yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
That was my question.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for letting me go first.
I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we maybe rotate these quarterly or something like that, that everybody gets to kind of move around when they get to present. When they get to present their committee reports. That's something maybe we can just talk about next month, not to talk about today. All right, so moving on to the next committee. Since again, Nathan, are you good? Or Joshua, are you good to go? Or do you want to go first? Or since we're in the spirit of moving around the committees, who wants to go next?
I'll let Joshua go. Out of the niceness of my heart.
All right, I appreciate it. All right. Perfect. Okay, so the bus shelter policy revision that was in the Finance and Policy Committee for months and months and months due to no quorum and has been held over since December. I am going to go ahead and give a brief history. We've approved that the threshold for bus shelters is 10 boardings a day, or for stops to get a shelter is 10 boardings a day. That left a bit of a gap where we did have some benches and also the smaller pedestal type seating, and we were trying to figure out a threshold for how many riders that should trigger that threshold. So the policy that we ended up approving has two parts. A, that an appropriate seating option may be provided at bus stops with at least 3 to 9 boardings a day. So we voted in our committee that the threshold be 3 boardings per day. And B, that an appropriate seating option may be installed temporarily at sites submitted for shelter development until the construction is completed. That essentially says that once there's a bench, if they still hit that 10 rider threshold, then that can then be changed over to a bus shelter from a pedestal or bench seat. Yeah, so we voted to make that threshold 3, and now we're bringing it to the full board to vote on that. This is an action item, so we need a motion from y'all and a vote after discussion or questions if there are any.
Joshua, just to clarify, this is for seating or, and then if it makes sense later, shelter. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we already have the shelter threshold. The whole board has voted on it, I think, maybe 2 years ago, ish, within the last 2 years. This is just for seating underneath that 10. It does, again, not disqualifying, qualifying for a shelter once that threshold of 10 is met.
I'll make a motion to support that.
Jen Truman, I'll second.
Sweet. Do I think who runs the vote? Do you? I imagine the chair runs the vote, so go for it.
It has been moved and properly seconded that we accept the seating policy for the bus stops. I'm going to go ahead and call by roll by name. Please say aye or nay if you approve or disapprove. Joshua Gill.
Aye.
Nathan Spencer.
Aye.
Karen Range.
Aye.
Jennifer Truman.
Aye.
LaPonda Edmondson.
Aye.
Latanya Williams.
Aye.
Linda Davis.
Aye.
Sarah Prado.
Aye.
And I as well, Tallulah Payne Mokai. So the move has been approved to accept the new seating policy.
I have 2 follow-up
Awesome.
questions.
Yeah.
I definitely wanted to support the motion and get that out there and start getting seats there. One is I would like to understand the decision between benches and pedestal seats and how we distinguish which one is appropriate on the site. So if we can just get back from staff how that thought process will happen as this policy gets implemented. And then 2, I've been asked by a couple people whether libraries are included on our preferred list. I know we have a couple of different like senior things and stuff in that thing. So if that's something that you guys could do in committee and get back to us, that'd be awesome.
Sure. I believe we discussed that the choice between pedestal and bench was mostly just like site dependent based on like width of sidewalk and that kind of thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, David.
No, that's correct. We'll have a little bit more flexibility with the pedestal seats than we would a full-size bench. So we'll, selectively, determine where those can be applied potentially in a little bit quicker fashion than a full-size bench would be.
Cool. And would adding libraries to the list where it says like DHIC sites and all that kind of stuff, would that take a full like rework of the policy, or is that just something we can amend? Or
that's definitely something that could be amended at some point in the future. I would recommend you potentially bring that back to the committee to have some additional conversation on.
Cool. Yes, can we add that to the agenda for next month for the transportation committee, or sorry, the policy and finance committee? Next up, on our list of things to discuss was I'm just going off of our agenda, equity fund, which we all discussed together. The next is the fiscal year 2023 budget, which will come for the full board's approval once it's been fully discussed in the Finance and Policy Committee. If you look at the board docs, it is attached for y'all to look at. The big takeaways, one that David already kind of mentioned, was that there's no fares going through till June, or there's no budgeted revenue from Farebox until June of 2023. Another big takeaway was that, I don't know if for those who were a part of the board when COVID kind of first hit, the state had cut funding for the transit agent, for Go Triangle, and I guess all transit agencies in the state. And so last year's budget, we didn't actually budget to receive that money from the state, but ended up getting it. So that line item is back in our budget as revenue. And Siobhan, will you end up doing the presentation next time for the full board? When we vote on it?
Hi, this is Siobhan, Senior Fiscal Analyst with the Transit Division. Joshua, we can definitely do that. It just depends on what the board would like to do.
Okay. Yeah, I think a brief summary when we actually vote would be beneficial.
And I think also Andrea included the slides from the presentation from the Finance and Policy Committee. So the slides that we went through in committee will be available for the full board after this meeting in board docs.
Cool, I appreciate it. Next is the mask enforcement, which we've already discussed, that the TSA has extended it. And then we have two items. I was not at the meeting in February, so if staff would give just a brief updates about the Hillsborough route equity analysis and the fare analysis.
Mr. Walker, do you want to give a quick little overview of those two items?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I heard Morgan maybe chiming in there. These were her items. We can certainly do that or bring it back as a refresher next month, either way.
There's no, I can speak on it very quickly, if that's okay with you all.
Yes, please.
Awesome. Morgan Simmons, Senior Planner with the City of Raleigh's Transit Division. And just a quick little recap, we presented the equity analysis for the Hillsborough route, which is the new route that will be funded through the annual work plan that's currently out for public comment. And this is a route that will traverse Hillsborough Road, that area connecting a lot of the universities as well as the North Carolina State Fairground area. This route will come into fruition at two parts. It will go as far as the NCDOT project that's under the grade separation project that's underway. And then after that project is complete, then it'll traverse the entirety of the route path. The equity analysis is a federal requirement, and it's every time we add services to the system, we're required to assess if the services will have any impacts to our more vulnerable communities, those being our minority communities and low-income communities. So we do this analysis and we put that information out for public comment. And so during the next meeting, staff will come back, provide you any comments that we received, and you'll have an opportunity to vote on that. And you can feel free to look on the board docs at the previous meetings, and that information is available for you all to review. The fare equity analysis, same framework for the most part. It is a federal requirement that anytime we have any fare changes to our system, whether it's an increase or decrease, we have to do an equity analysis. And so a part of the COVID-19 precautions was the removal or the suspension of fares. And so anytime you have, even in emergency situations like the pandemic, anything that exceeds over 6 months is considered a permanent change, so to speak. So we are required to do an equity analysis on that. There was a little bit of a lag on that because I think there was a lot of back and forth, not knowing exactly where we're going to go with it. But that's why we're moving forward with this equity analysis to evaluate the impacts that a free fare system would have on those same vulnerable communities being low income and minorities. So that information also gets published for public commenting. And so staff will bring that item back to you all next month with any comments that we've received.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Awesome. That concludes the updates from the Finance and Policy Committee.
Thank you, Joshua, for giving us those updates, and Morgan for chiming in. We appreciate it. All right, going into the homes. Yes.
So I just going to say real quick, thanks to Siobhan for putting the budget together, and that's a lot of information there. That information, obviously, as she stated, is in board docs. So we will be coming back next month, though, for approval of that. We'll be happy to bring that back to committee and to the full board, for approval next month. But I did want to put it out there that again, we would like to have that out there for the board's concurrence next month, and just so you know what we're planning to move forward with as far as submitting that to council as our recommended budget. So again, just wanted to make you aware of that request for action item next month.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And I think that we all kind of want to see that, but I know that as we move through this transition with the agenda today, that some of that information probably wasn't prepared. Was that what you were kind of getting to? That this was going to be presented to us anyway, right? Joshua? The budget?
Yes. It's available now. There'll be a presentation next meeting and a vote next meeting. Perfect.
We would love that. Thank you, David. So we're gonna go ahead and move on. Let Nathan land this plane. I know that some of this is like a slight overlap, not a whole lot, but it looks like at least one or two things. But
yeah.
Thank you, Nathan, for your patience and your flexibility of moving around your committee report. And go ahead and take it away.
No worries. The route committee is always flexible and happy to help. We already discussed the equity fund as a whole. So I'm just going to go through some of the other items. The New Bern Ave BRT canvassing was something that was brought up and discussed in route committee and led to a good amount of discussion, in part because staff's plan is to canvass businesses. Their aim, at least at the time of route, was only to do the ones in downtown, though I don't know if that has changed. Jen, do you look like you raised your hand? I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I was scratching my nose.
So I don't know if that has changed, and I'll look to staff to help answer if that's extended to the entire corridor, or if we're still just doing downtown and we're making it.
Yeah, so I can answer that. I would say that there's different layers of communication. This particular communication was regarding changes to right-of-way adjacent to businesses along the corridor. So regardless of where that business is, if there's any change in right-of-way associated with that, that's this particular canvassing. As well as that, there's direct contact made with business owners as well as business renters at every location along the corridor as well. So there's a couple of different layers there depending upon the purpose, but will and each individual business owner or renter / owner in the corridor be contacted? The answer is yes, sir.
Wonderful. Okay, so we also went over the public comment regarding Avon Ferry that was passed to our committee. We discussed that and looked at it a little more closely. We do have a quarterly update. We asked for a quarterly update on the Wake Transit Plan metrics. So we got that. In our pending folder, I'm gonna go quickly through these so we can finish this report and then finish up totally. I'm looking at my other screen. I apologize. But we did follow up on yet another public comment in January. We got an update on the 2023 work plan request, which is still open for comment until mid March. So I think we've got another 5-6 days to comment on that. So please, if you have not, go and look up the Wake Transit Plan FY23 update and make comments. We talked a little bit about the new East Raleigh Park and Ride that is coming in, that is that future transit center that's been talked about quite a bit, but also included in the FY23 work plan, I believe. And then the two other items, the Midtown Shuttle update. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I believe there's an RFP already on the ground to run a shuttle between a microtransit of some sort between downtown and Midtown. Is that correct? David Eatman?
I'm sorry. I thought, for some reason I had David Walker on my mind. So,
oh no, I mean either one.
So actually, that is any day now. It is so it has been developed in its final form. It's just in the city's internal review. As soon as it comes out of internal review, which should be literally any time now, that will hit the street. So a little bit later than we thought, maybe by a week or two, but not off by too much.
So this
should be coming out. We should be talking about it being on the street by the next meeting for sure.
Thank you. So this is, just to give some context, this is not a fixed route bus as much as it is a more on-demand service. So this is going to be experimented with, and we shall see how it looks and works. I'm very eager to see the reaction and the ridership on it and the interest. And the last thing was something that we've talked quite a bit about in these meetings is the joint planning committee and bike pedestrian advisory committee meetings. Morgan had put together a questionnaire. I think it being after 6 o'clock, it might be a little late for us to go through that questionnaire, but I'm highly encouraging us to have that as part of the board meeting or a piece of the committees, because it is she is asking a lot of good questions. She's trying to gather what the need for us to do, and I think today is a really good example of sort of that action working out really well, of gathering information, but there's also a need to sort of connect with the commissions themselves. So definitely encourage staff to see if we can get that into somewhere along the way. That is the route committee quick and dirty.
Thank you, Nathan, for making it dirty and quick. I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna speak for myself. I'm tired. I've had a long day. Thank you for all the information you all have shared. To Morgan, is there a way that that the survey can be something that we can take at the next meeting together? And then that way, if you have any extra questions or questions to fill out, or would you like to send it out again? I know that you sent it out before, but send it out again before the meeting, get some info on. to already have information before the meeting? Does it make sense? Like, to make sure that you get the answers that you need, should we go ahead and do it together at the next meeting? Or do you want to send it out ahead of time to like see if you can gather some insight for those who haven't had the opportunity to take it? Morgan.
And this is, sorry, got a little bit of a lag. This is Morgan Simmons, City of Raleigh, Senior Planner. No problem, we can resend it out. It is included in the summary of the information that was provided during the last conversation that we had at the committee level. It is included in the slide doc from the last meeting. But what we can do is, since, you know, that's been a minute, we can send it out separately so that you all have an opportunity to review of it. That's not a problem.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns, needs?
I'm sorry, I have one question. It'll be quick. It is, when will we next hear about an update about the status of the contracting?
I did have a question to that regard too. I actually had two questions, but I just didn't want to belabor the point and figure out if Mr. Bryant, if you happen to have any report that you wanted to present to us as an RTA. Yes,
Hi,
sir.
Bobby Bryant, Go Raleigh GM. Madam Chair, thank you. I'm going to be very honest. I was multitasking. I think there was a question about the contract.
So we actually, I'm sorry. I'm tired. This is my tired behavior. We can probably save this conversation to the next meeting. I've had a very long day. All right. No, we were asking about, yes, the contracts. We were also asking if you had any report to give to us.
No, ma'am, I do not have a report at this time. What was that report on that you were looking for?
Just any accidents, anything that like from the, you know, just any reports on transit that you might have had. I wanted to give you an opportunity since we said that we were going to try to give you that at our meetings.
Oh, things have been relatively quiet on this, on our end, generally speaking. We have had a few, I would consider them moderate size accidents. These were things outside of control of the operator, and those things are resolving themselves as appropriately. We do have a few buses that we are down due to those accidents, but again, those things are being resolved.
Okay, thank you very much. And if we can have a report, since we'll be in person next week, just knowing the outcome of those. And I know I got some information on the bus accident. So if maybe we can have that prepared for next month when we meet in person.
And you want to hear about all our incidents?
Yes. Yes, we did. We want to hear about everything. We want to report about what's going on. And we've been asking for a couple months now.
Madam Chair, included in that, I'd like to make sure that we have assaults or anything like that. I've heard that there's been some increase in that for operators, some threats, and I just want to be sure that we have a good understanding of where the direction of this is going.
Yes, accidents, incidents, any incidents when it comes to the bus that we would need to know about or we should know about, just so we can be abreast of how safe the buses are or what's going on. If somebody asks us a question or sends us information, then we don't have an answer. It seems like we don't know. So this is just covering all us for the next meeting. If you could possibly give us a report, especially since it'll be our, commemorative in-person meeting post-COVID. So, let's celebrate together with a report from management.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns, additions from staff?
Can we get an answer to my question?
What was your question? Yes. She was asking about if there were any, what's up with the contract?
So the management contract is a shared contract with Wake County. So we, both parties are currently reviewing the final document, and that one too, as soon as those final reviews are done, we'll be ready to solicit. So we're just as anxious as everyone else is for that to hit the street, and we hope hope that one's going to be right around the corner as well.
And we just have we happen to have any new requests or anybody sending any inquiries that didn't before or anything like that?
I would say that we have had several inquiries into the date of solicitation for that. And our response to them has been as well, especially in the last few weeks, that it should be out very soon.
All right, thank you. All right, so are there any other questions, comments, or concerns from the authority?
The only other thing that I would say is the huge amount of information provided today. Please note that any items that were presented at committees are still in board docs, and those presentations are attached to those items in board docs at the committee level. The overall PowerPoint slide that you saw today that Andrea prepared, we usually load that up immediately following the meeting. So that will be available in board docs as soon as the meeting's over. If you want to go back and review those slides, especially all those planning slides and housing and neighborhood slides, a lot of information there. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that that would be out there on board docs if you wanted to pull that.
Perfect, good, because that was a question. I probably would have thought of it again and asked you offline. So thank you for bringing that up. David, always on it. Are there any other questions from authority, from staff? Anything that we want, since we're going to be in person next month, before we wrap up, that we want to be present at that space? We'll make sure we're covering all our bases for our last virtual meeting. Yes, thank you, staff, for all the hard work you've done. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you for everything, keeping us in line and on board while we've been virtual. I know it hasn't been easy for any of us, but if all hearts and minds are clear, I want to thank you all for joining us at our March Transit Authority meeting, now concluding March 10th, 2022 at 6:13 p.m. We look forward to seeing you in person in April. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about us getting back into our in-person meetings. If there's anything we need in between, please reach out, and see you all soon. So have a great and restful rest of your day.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Have a great one.
Rest well, Toulouse.
The dictator.